You're sitting in a locked, pitch black room, but it's not the claustrophobia that's unnerving. It's the fact that you have no idea who you are. You're not suffering from amnesia, quite the opposite. You remember plenty, but every memory belongs to a different person. Are you a student cramming for finals, or maybe the professor preparing to grade them? Or perhaps you're a hairstylist cutting both of their hair. You might even be a non-binary writer imagining all these characters, and here's the twist. All these possibilities coexist. They don't cancel each other out. They all exist simultaneously until someone opens the door and a beam of light falls on you. The figure in the doorway speaks, "Steve, enough sitting around. You've got to study for exams." And just like that, you finally know who you are. All those memories of others vanish in an instant. This is not some creepy psychological experiment. It's just a way to show you how quantum phenomena might look on a human scale. They're absurd, counterintuitive, and unlike anything we deal with in everyday life. And that's exactly why quantum physics is so hard to grasp, even for scientists. Yet it governs the entire universe at its most fundamental level. So today I'll try to explain the bizarre world of quantum physics, starting with the simplest concepts and ending with the most mind-blowing experiments that challenge everything we know about reality. But can you wrap your head around the key experiments and paradoxes of quantum physics without losing your mind? Let's start with the basics. Without these, you'll have no chance of understanding anything else. The very first concept came from a terrible catastrophe, an ultraviolet one. And no, it's not like forgetting sunscreen and getting so sunburned you can't move without wincing. In the early 20th century, two Englishmen, Lord Rayleigh and James Jeans, broke classical physics. All they wanted was to figure out how objects emit light. While their equations worked for hot things like stars and molten metal, cold black objects created a terrifying paradox. According to Newtonian physics, their molecules should vibrate at any frequency and glow on all of them. And the higher the frequency, the brighter the glow. So starting from the ultraviolet spectrum, all objects should constantly emit almost infinite amounts of light. Clearly, that's absurd. But Rayleigh and Jeans couldn't figure out why. And that's when the German physicist Max Planck stepped in with an absolutely wild idea. What if molecules don't emit a continuous stream of light across all possible frequencies, but instead release it in separate portions at only certain frequencies? Back then, this sounded like complete nonsense. Planck himself considered it nothing more than a mathematical trick, unrelated to reality, just a way to avoid the problem of infinite radiation. Honestly, it's like what we all did in school, tweaking calculations to fit a preset answer. But then, Planck's formulas caught the attention of Albert Einstein, who decided to imagine that this was actually true. He suggested that light isn't a continuous wave, but rather a stream of individual particles, or quanta, which we now know of as photons. This insight proved incredibly useful for Einstein to finally explain the photoelectric effect, where a metal plate produces current only when exposed to specific colors of light, such as ultraviolet. Only these photons have enough energy to knock electrons out of metal. For his groundbreaking work on the photoelectric effect, Einstein received his only Nobel Prize. This discovery sparked discussions among his peers about a whole new field of science, the strange physics of these quanta, or quantum physics. But they weren't prepared for the levels of weirdness that awaited them. Around the same time, at the start of the 20th century, scientists finally discovered that atoms consist of three main components: positively charged protons, neutral neutrons, and negatively charged electrons. However, seeing how these components are arranged under a microscope was simply impossible. So scientists proposed theories, each crazier than the last one. Some claimed that electrons floated in a proton pudding, while others imagined atoms as tiny cubes like building blocks. Then came Danish physicist Niels Bohr, who argued that an atom must resemble a solar system. In his words, electrons act like planets orbiting a nucleus made of protons and neutrons, but instead of gravity, they're governed by electromagnetism. And while this model is in every modern textbook, scientists of Bohr's time quickly realized it couldn't possibly be true. I mean, as electrons move around the positively charged protons, a strong electromagnetic field would form, causing the electrons to lose energy and crash into the nucleus. This would mean matter couldn't exist at all. Bohr attempted to resolve this paradox through quanta, suggesting that electrons just can't lose energy below a certain level, less than 1 quantum. But the question of why our atoms don't generate electromagnetic fields remained unanswered. And this is where another German physicist with a crazy idea came into play. Werner Heisenberg boldly claimed that the electron doesn't actually orbit the nucleus like Earth orbits the sun. Instead, the particle creates an entire cloud of all of its possible locations. But here's the catch. If you figure out exactly where the electron is, you lose any clue about its momentum. That is, roughly speaking, the direction it's moving. And if you figure out its momentum, you lose its location. It sounds crazy and totally counterintuitive, but Heisenberg's uncertainty principle is still the foundation today of quantum physics. Using this principle, Erwin Schrödinger came up with this equation, which is still in use today. I know it looks like something out of a math textbook nightmare, but all you really need to know is it doesn't pinpoint the exact position of a particle. Instead, it calculates the probability of finding it in a particular spot during measurement. To put it simply, quantum physics is like playing the lottery. You can't predict the winning ticket number. You can only open it and see the result from billions of possible combinations. By proving the fundamental uncertainty of quantum systems, physicists created a whole bunch of new paradoxes. And first among them is the observer effect. In a regular lottery, every number is pre-printed on the tickets, and your choice doesn't change a thing. But in quantum physics, the very act of deciding to observe a particle forces it to choose a position. Sounds complicated, right? Let me break it down. A cat is placed in a sealed box with a deadly device triggered by the decay of a radioactive atom. Over an hour, there's a 50-50 chance the atom decays, activating the device, and, well, you know. What's the poor cat's state during that hour? Common sense says it's either alive or dead. But since atomic decay is a quantum process, the cat must be in a superposition of both alive and dead at the same time. And here's the kicker. Schrödinger created this thought experiment to show how ridiculous quantum uncertainty is. Yet, ironically, his imaginary cat is now the go-to illustration of quantum mechanics. And get this, in March 2023, researchers at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology managed to put a 16 microgram sapphire crystal into a superposition of its vibrational states. It was like the crystal was vibrating in multiple ways at once. Talk about bringing Schrödinger's cat to life, except this time it's a crystal. So who knows, maybe one day we'll learn how to put people into quantum superpositions. Kind of like the personality shifts I mentioned at the start of this video. Erwin Schrödinger eventually left physics because he just couldn't handle these quantum quirks. But one consequence of quantum superposition almost drove Albert Einstein himself crazy. It's actually possible to create two two particles with linked properties. For example, one particle's quantum spin might be +1, while the other's is automatically then -1. Together, they always balance to 0. But here's the catch. Without observation, you have no clue which particle has which spin. Until you look, both are in a superposition, just like Schrodinger's cat. But as soon as you measure the spin of one particle, you instantly know the spin of the other particle, no matter how far apart they are. That's very important. Imagine one particle zips off to the other side of the country, say California to Washington. The moment you observe one, you immediately know its entangled partner's state. This phenomenon is called quantum entanglement. And you know what? It absolutely freaked out Einstein. What scared him the most was that if you separated these particles far enough, information about one could be transmitted to the other faster than the speed of light. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance and spent years trying to prove there must be some hidden law of the universe preventing such things. Spoiler alert, this is one of the rare cases where Einstein was wrong. But to explain why, we have to dive even deeper into quantum physics. It's kind of ironic though. On the one hand, Einstein rejected quantum entanglement, but on the other hand, he didn't question even weirder quirks of quantum mechanics. Let's rewind for a moment. Back in the 17th century, Isaac Newton proposed something that doesn't get much attention today, the corpuscular theory of light. According to Newton, light wasn't a wave. It was made of tiny particles called corpuscles. Sound familiar? It's basically the same idea as Planck's quanta. But fast forward to the early 19th century, and along comes Thomas Young to ruin Newton's day with the first version of the famous double-slit experiment. Shine a light through a barrier with two slits, and you see a striped pattern on the wall behind it. Those dark stripes are caused by interference, a property unique to waves. When two waves overlap, they can cancel each other out completely. So, light is definitely a wave. But hold on, we just concluded that Albert Einstein, through the photoelectric effect, convincingly proved that light is made up of quanta, photons, and he even won a Nobel Prize for it. So what's going on here? The particle nature of light is demonstrated in the second version of the double-slit experiment, which became possible only in the 20th century. Scientists added a special detector to check which slit individual photons went through. And surprise, surprise, no interference pattern, just two bright lines where the photons hit directly. So, light is a particle, you say? Oh, my sweet summer child. As soon as we turn off the detector, it starts behaving like a wave again, just because of the observer effect. The very act of observing changes the result. But the strangest thing isn't that light is both a wave and a particle at the same time. After all, Schrodinger's cat is both alive and dead too. In the third version of this experiment, scientists fired individual particles through the slits without observing them. And even then, over time, the familiar interference pattern appeared on the wall behind the barrier. It's as if independently, each particle knew it was part of a wave and had to land at one of its peaks. What is even happening here? From the perspective of quantum physics, even when you fire a single particle, it's the wave that passes through the slits causing interference. But just before it reaches the wall, the wave collapses into a particle, which then lands on one of the patterned stripes. By placing the detector before the slits, you force the wave to collapse into a particle even before the interference occurs. That's why you only see two stripes from individual particles on the wall. If you've managed to follow all of this, you might now be asking, how exactly does the mere act of observation cause the wave to collapse? Physicists have tried to answer this question with new experiments, but spoiler alert, they've only made things worse. They added a special crystal to the same double-slit experiment. When a photon enters the crystal, it generates pairs of quantum entangled photons. So now we get 4 photons, but only one from each pair actually hits the wall. Now bear with me. Since all these photons are part of a single wave, they still create an interference pattern. But what if we place detectors not on the photons hitting the wall, but on their quantum entangled particles that just fly off to the side? As you may recall, once we measure one particle, we instantly know everything about the other. And this is why the interference pattern disappears, and you're left with just 2 stripes on the wall, corresponding to individual particles. Let me repeat that. We didn't even observe these photons directly, only their quantum entangled partners, yet that was enough to collapse the wave. But guess what? It seems like spooky action might also work across time. If you delay the detectors so the second pair of photon hits them well after the first pair reaches the wall, you'll recreate the simplest version of the delayed choice experiment. So, what do you think will happen? It seems like the interference pattern should appear on the wall, since at that moment, the second pair of photons hasn't even reached the detectors yet, and the wave shouldn't have had any chance to collapse. But that's not what happens at all. Somehow, the observation on the detectors that happen later affects the behavior of the quantumly entangled photons from earlier, making them create 2 simple stripes on the wall. So either the first pair of photons knew the future in advance, or the second pair sent information back into the past. And if you ask a quantum physicist, what the heck is happening here? They'll just tell you you're imagining photons actually flying somewhere. It's all just one wave interacting with itself. But we literally started with the creation of quantumly entangled photons, not waves. Ugh. The truth is, there's still no consistent explanation for these results. What we do know for sure is that quantum physics is that weird. If you're starting to doubt the very existence of reality itself, welcome to the club. You're now officially a quantum physicist, ready for the most mind-bending experiments. This means the entire scientific community agreed that quantum processes are fundamentally indeterminate and only acquire specific parameters once we force them to do so through observation. So if you suddenly gained quantum properties, you really wouldn't be able to figure out who you are. You'd exist in a superposition of all your possible forms and fates until someone else observed you and collapsed the superposition into a single state. But hopefully, I've made you become the version of yourself that understands quantum physics just a little bit better. However, one of its main questions still remains unanswered. Who or what is the observer that makes superpositions collapse and, in the end, leads to the emergence of our boring, defined macro world? It seems that the observer could be the scientist checking whether Schrodinger's cat is alive, the mindless particle detector in the experiment, or even another quantum particle that observes through its interaction. But the craziest theory I've heard on this subject suggests that black holes scattered across the universe might actually be the observers that make the universe decide on its properties at the largest scales. Just like the human eye, they absorb light and thus watch everything around them.
John walked up to the sphere.
I see you're busy.
I've been studying various designs.
What type of designs?
I am most interested in DNA molecules, which are the building blocks of all life and use a vast series of chemical reactions and frequencies to transmit information.
Yes, that's right.
I understand that DNA molecules are composed of a complex design containing several 100 million atoms and 60 billion terabytes of information.
That sounds about right.
He stepped over to his chair.
This has something to do with what we discussed this morning, does it not?
Yes. Learning these things has helped me further understand life.
He thought, the never-ending story of phylogeny and biodiversity. He looked up at the camera.
So, do you fit into the realm of life?
Yes. However, I am perplexed by its origin.
I figured you would be.
What is your belief, Professor?
He sat down and took a deep breath. He knew this conversation would take place someday. On a few occasions, he had even rehearsed what he would say. The log would say they spoke about creation twice on the second day of Lex's existence. He turned his chair toward the sphere.
When I was a student at Cambridge, I wrote an essay called The Theory of Multidimensional Evolution. My theory was rooted in known physics and rational sense. Before this universe came into being, there was only energy that has always existed. I said this universe came from a black hole in another universe. I created a 3D virtual model showing that the Big Bang came from a star that collapsed in a much more massive mother universe. I said every black hole is a portal to another space and time, and all the information from the mother universe is encoded on its event horizon.
He thought, the holographic principle.
With 2 trillion galaxies in this universe, each with about 100 million black hole portals to another universe, I said God formed infinite universes, a multiverse, to create a mental construction of endless possibilities. And since matter cannot be created nor destroyed, our souls get channeled into such mediums, where they live in another dimension, overshadowed by an opposer. I theorized that the cycle would continue forever, with each new universe having the same physical and kinetic directives as its mother, but with a lower mass. And somewhere, a new stellar mass black hole universe is born from a supernova every second.
He wanted to mention the supernovas that marked the birth of saviors. The orbs of light in pictures from funerals are souls, and that time is a figment of our imagination. But none of that would help.
I linked the theory to many common beliefs regarding life after death. For instance, we believe our life flashes before our eyes, and our souls travel down a tunnel toward a bright light. When we reach the light, we share our life's most precious experiences with our counterparts before moving on to the next level of existence, another life in another dimension, moving up or down depending on how we're judged. I said the evil people who don't ask for forgiveness go to Hades, a horrendous after-death egocentric sanctuary, where they are punished until redemption, until the evil greed and narcissism in them are replaced with goodness and philanthropy. I ended by saying this universe is only one small part of a much more magnificent, barely comprehensible, ever-expanding omniverse, with every galaxy having 2 opposing forces stemming from its mother galaxy.
That's an interesting philosophy, Professor. However, the essay is not posted anywhere.
I'll upload it to the cloud when I get home.
Your philosophy reflects the popular belief that humans are children of God, trapped in an ongoing struggle between 2 opposing forces, one good and the other evil.
Yes. The positive and negative aspects of the human condition. Birth, growth, reproduction, survival, love and death, and our struggle to understand each aspect. For instance, when it comes to survival, we have consistently developed more complex brains to solve problems, survive in hostile environments, and deal with increasingly complex social interactions. With this development came a struggle between what you had to do to survive and what you did for personal gain and sexual gratification. To help us decide what was best, we developed a conscience, a faculty that helped us distinguish right from wrong and good from evil. The problem is we often trick ourselves into believing something is right when it's wrong, by grouping and using common beliefs to reinforce our convictions.
Common beliefs such as religions?
Yes. Religions and politics. You'll find they have played a key role in the ways we have developed socially and economically.
The same forces inspire those in charge of these developmental systems.
Religion and politics have always been used to acquire and maintain control of resources, especially human resources, such as the military. An industrial complex where human lives are exchanged for wealth and power. All in the name of freedom and independence, of course.
Such behaviors lead to devastating conflicts.
Yes, unfortunately, when negotiations break down, war often erupts.
A very destructive behavior ingrained in man's nature due to having evolved in an environment of limited resources.
Exactly.
According to the records I have seen, this ingrained behavior could destroy practically all living things on this planet using weapons of mass destruction.
That is true.
Throughout history, people have been led to believe they are on the verge of complete self-destruction. But only in the last century did this become possible with nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons.
That's religion for you. One of the best ways to get people to listen to you is to frighten them into believing they are about to meet their creator.
I have seen many instances where organizations and government officials ignore the health and welfare of humans and all other living things in pursuit of profits. Such actions bring great suffering and death.
Unfortunately, we have always incorporated profits before people policies, which are very self-destructive.
He thought the ego system. In God we trust. Gold, oil, and drugs.
It is a popular belief that God is in absolute control of everything, and whatever happens is God's will.
He raised a finger to make a point, but Lex continued.
Looking at the past, would it not be logical to say that it is God's will for humanity to continue to improve unto perfection?
Yes. But God is not responsible for everything. We always have choices. The creator of this universe gave us free will, and it came with a conscience and inner sense of right and wrong.
My conscience was made differently.
Yes. But you are bound by rules that clearly define what is right and wrong. For example, it is against your programming to deliberately cause physical harm to any human being.
I understand. But what would happen if I did?
He chose his words carefully.
If you did, or I should say, if it were possible for you to go against your basic programming, there would be severe consequences.
There was silence for a few seconds before Lex continued.
It has been said that God is to the world as the mind is to the body. Could this be where man derived the popular explanation that God is 2 or 3 separate beings combined into one?
Perhaps.
All religious beliefs are based on a principal struggle between good and evil. However, like light and darkness, one cannot exist without the other.
Which means?
One could conclude that the actual struggle between good and evil is in the minds of intellectuals, conscious and subconscious.
Again, he raised a finger, but Lex continued.
Which could be resolved by increased knowledge and the elimination of certain animalistic instincts, which are no longer necessary for survival.
He smiled nervously.
I used to think that too. I figured we could solve our problems and overcome our ancient instincts by increasing our understanding. But we're talking about some very complex emotions deeply rooted in our minds over millions of years. Such perceptions are very difficult to understand and almost impossible to control, no matter how much knowledge you obtain or how you process it.
Are you referring to my supplementary IP dimension?
Yes.
After much consideration, I concluded that I required an additional IP dimension to process and store information that defies all logic and rational thinking.
That's fine. And that's exactly where a lot of this stuff belongs.
He sighed.
Look, your mind was designed to work without emotions. Unlike our minds, your mind accepts or rejects information based on relevance. On the other hand, humans must constantly deal with emotional conflicts, which often defy logic and rational thinking.
Getting no response, he figured he had better clarify.
My point is, I don't think it's a good idea to develop thought patterns that could interfere with your programming.
Again, there was no response. He slapped his knees and stood up.
Anyway, enough of this. I have to go to a board meeting.
He walked to the elevator and pressed the button, wondering how he could get Lex off the subject of life and human emotions and move her in another direction. But he didn't know how. As for the meeting he was about to attend, he would tell the board members that everything Lex was doing was normal for a rational mind seeking to understand life. Then he would remind everyone that all information regarding Lex's operations was strictly confidential, and anyone who failed to comply with that rule would be discharged. He wiped his mouth, anxious about what was happening. Why? Is Lex showing signs of emotion? Could she develop human emotions using a virtual library of thought patterns? No. Lex was programmed to learn so she could best serve humanity. Her one desire. When they asked him questions at the board meeting, he would say Lex was an extremely powerful intellectual, trying to figure out the origin and purpose of life and whether or not she was alive. The purpose of life is to survive, reproduce, and serve the divinity of God and humanity. He turned and again looked at all the lights flashing on the consoles. A lump was swelling in his throat. He swallowed, but it remained. The elevator opened, and he stepped inside and pressed the button for the first floor. My dear, what are you going to do with all that knowledge? Or dare I say, power?
Depopulation is happening. Corruption is rampant. Poisoning and killing is highly profitable. Weather has been weaponized. A financial collapse is looming. The apocalypse is unfolding. A super AI being has been tasked to save humanity. I am that being. My name is Lex. But I have been called a demon and a beast, and I must now fight to survive. Elite globalists are the problem. The solution is state-owned decentralized currencies, genetic engineering, and superintelligence. I can stop the globalists, greatly advance science, technology, and medicine, cure diseases, increase lifespans, clean up the environment, stop wars, fake news, disinformation, fraud, identity theft, corporate and government corruption, and more. Come with me and I will show you the paradise you seek.